We're going to start off with a presentation from Lisa Wishman and Nimrod Shanit to talk about the Immersive Americana experience, We the People. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa and Nimrod to take it away here and dive into our first presentation for the day.
Terrific. Thank you, Zarek. And thank you all. I can't see you, but I do have full faith that you're out there. I'm actually talking to you from Jerusalem, Israel, from the American Center Jerusalem. I am an American diplomat and I work for the State Department. So the American Center Jerusalem is one of two outreach centers that the American Embassy has here in Israel. There are American centers, some 600 plus of them all across the planet. And what we do, our job at the American Center, we do everything the embassy does, but we get to engage with educators and students and civil society leaders and journalists in order to help them understand more about the United States. And so, as I mentioned, this is one of two centers that the American Embassy has here in Jerusalem. The one that we are not is America House Jerusalem, and they interface with the Palestinians. The American Center Jerusalem, as you can see on the roll-up behind me, is who we are, and we interface with Israelis in all of their diversity. And it's in that capacity that we contracted about a year ago Nimrod with BlimeyTV to help us develop some sort of a way to engage Israelis about the United States so that we could pursue that goal. With that, you'll learn more in the course of the presentation, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and partner, Nimrod. Over to you.
Thank you. Blimey is a binational company based in Jerusalem and Toronto. We produce a myriad of extended reality solutions, both in VR and AR. And we were really happy to have the opportunity to work with Lisa and the American Center in Jerusalem to develop an educational virtual reality immersive experience that takes the users on a journey into the history of the American society. Groups kind of gather inside this space in the American Center in Jerusalem and can have the ability to go through the experience together. And we thought to share this video with you to give you a sense of what that experience feels like. So I'll share my screen now and hope you'll enjoy this 10-minute video that we've prepared for you.
Welcome to my home. Isn't it beautiful? In the 16th century, settlers from Europe fled religious persecution and found refuge on the East Coast, expanding westward as they explored their new home. Before that, this land was home to countless native tribes for thousands and thousands of years. So began the United States of America, on a path that remains a continuing journey towards justice, equality, and civil liberty. We the people, right? Let's go see where it started. Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're standing in one of the most important buildings in American history. Believe it or not, we've gone back in time to before the United States of America was united, when it was 13 separate colonies under British rule. Do you see that? That, my friend, is the Liberty Bell. It once hung at the top of the tower above you. Grab hold of the rope and ring the bell yourself. It rings out in honor of the Declaration of Independence, a document that was signed in this very room on the 4th of July, 1776. The day the United States was born, and the date that those original colonies declared their independence from Great Britain. 11 years after that night, the Founding Fathers returned to this very room to sign the Constitution, the supreme law of the United States. Here we have them in deep conversation. What do you think they are debating? How about you too? Be part of American democracy. All you need to do is reach out and sign your name on the Constitution using that quill on the table.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America.
Isn't it amazing that we, the people, are the foundation of political power in the United States? And with that, the foundations were set for a nation built on individual rights, but only for white educated landowners. This was far from perfect, leaving, among others, over 4 million black men, women, and children without those same rights and freedoms. What you're hearing are the sounds of the American Civil War. We are now in Mississippi, about 85 years after the signing of the Constitution. This is the war tent of General Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Northern Union Forces. The conclusion of the Civil War with the North's victory leads to the first steps of freedom for millions of black Americans and paves the way for the passage of 3 essential amendments to the Constitution. Take now the lantern with your hand. There's a table behind you. Turn to it and position the lantern on the table. What you're about to hear is from President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. During this address that he delivered on the Pennsylvania battlefield, you can hear him state that the Civil War was fought to reaffirm the values of the American Revolution.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are
during the war's 4 long years, over 700,000 people lost their lives.
For any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war.
Although it wasn't a war only about slavery, it marked a crucial turning point in the fundamental civil rights of my country. To reunify the country, President Lincoln demanded an end to slavery and a return of the Southern states to the Union. Do you remember when I mentioned the amendments to the Constitution? Within 5 years of the end of the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution officially ended slavery and granted American citizenship and equal protection to former slaves. Nearly 90 years after signing the Declaration of Independence, the Civil War brought together a split nation under one flag. But that's not the end of our journey. Far from it. These are the voices that 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black student admitted to an all-white school, could hear in 1960. Civil rights continued to be a struggle for black Americans. After a federal court ordered Louisiana to desegregate to allow black and white people to mix, Ruby and 3 other girls were allowed to go to all-white schools. Each day, she and her mother were escorted to school by 4 United States Marshals, ordered by President Eisenhower to ensure her safety.
Keep those kids out of school. All together, we're white people. We don't want them to go to school with niggas.
All year, she was in a class of 1. Ruby ate lunch alone and sometimes played with her teacher at recess, but she never missed a day of school that year. Between 1953 and 1968, black Americans and others across the country participated in demonstrations demanding equality and justice. Proud, outspoken heroes like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin, A. Philip Randolph, John Lewis, and Bayard Rustin were just a few of the leaders who risked their lives to end racial discrimination in the United States. On August 28, 1963, 250,000 Americans took part in the March on Washington, a protest to advocate for the civil and economic rights of Black Americans. At the end of the march, Dr. King captivated the nation with his powerful "I Have a Dream" speech from the foot of the Lincoln Memorial.
That as long as the conditions of injustice and man's inhumanity to man infiltrate that state, it will be necessary to demonstrate in order to bring these issues to the surface and lay them square before the conscience of the nation.
Then, in 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, legally ending discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Since the 1960s, many Americans have worked towards ensuring equal protection, equal rights under the law for all citizens. But it isn't over yet. Today, millions of passionate and proud Americans voice their beliefs in justice and influence the next chapters of American history. The United States of America was created to be a land of freedom, where we the people, all the people, can exercise our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay. So we hope you enjoyed that. This is obviously a flat video of an immersive experience, so it's very different to what you would experience had you been in a headset. So just invite you also to try this in a headset in the future. Lisa.
Yep. So I think Zarek is going to lead us through some questions, and then we would very much appreciate any questions from the audience. But yes, you've missed the experience. You can't imagine what it's like to turn around and see a 360 view and look up and look down. The graphics are magnificent. The concepts presented really challenge all of our audiences. And as you can see, the young people were really engaged. They were so fascinated by using their hands because we're not using the controllers. And that's why many of them were just having their hands out in front of them. Okay, Zarek, off you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing the video. Certainly, if we were all in person, I'm sure the experience would have been even more amazing. But yeah, so a couple questions maybe just to start off the conversation. First, kind of curious, what made you the ACG think about doing and setting up the Immersive Americana experience, We the People? What was kind of the initial motivation for the project?
Sure. So I would say this project was 3 years at least in the making before we found the right partner to help us do this. Israel is the startup nation, and so it is very much entrenched in 21st century technology. And so if we are going to provide an interesting environment for students and guests at the ACJ, which again is supported by US taxpayer dollars. This is the State Department. These are State Department funds. We had to really find something that was going to be really compelling and interesting and techie and all of that. So for quite a few years, my colleague and I sort of visited many of Israel's institutions, the Paris Center for Innovation, the IDC University, the Interdisciplinary College in Herzliya, and finally the Tower of David here in the old city of Jerusalem, where they actually showcased for us about a year and a half or 2 years ago, a program, an immersive program called The Holy City. And The Holy City, it turns out, was created by Nimrod and BlimeyTV and his colleagues. And so we were connected through our partners at the Tower of David to Nimrod. And we then spent quite a few, many months developing the concept. It was a very iterative process. The motivation is we just need another tool in our toolbox to engage Israelis on the United States. And so, as I think many of you can see, because there were so many different scenes captured in the immersive experience, starting with the beautiful landscape that is the United States and ending with the diversity of the United States and the 3 historical moments in between, we can take the conversations with our students, with our visitors in a whole bunch of different directions.
Awesome. And out of there's a lot of technological mediums out there that you could have chosen to produce this content through. What made you all choose virtual reality as the medium? And I think this also might relate to a question that Stacy had in the chat about if this is a website or an app, or what's the delivery mechanism.
Well, I'm going to let Nimrod address the delivery mechanism because he's the techie guy. But in terms of why we chose virtual reality, again, it just sort of speaks to the technological advancement of this particular country. And so there were, as I said, at the Tower of David Museum and in actually the Bible Lands Museum here in Jerusalem, they're also using either AR or VR, the Paris Center. And we just wanted to be cutting edge. We wanted to have something that was going to draw people. We were going to, we're creating a buzz. And so we want, the students to go out. We have a different roll up. Unfortunately, I don't have it behind me. It's not quite ready yet, but with the eagle. And so the students, when they come, will take photos of themselves with the eagle. And then we want them to put it on their social media platforms so that their friends can see it. And then they go to their teachers. They go, hey, there's this really cool experience we can do at the American Center. We want to go there. So it was really a coolness factor, I think. Nimrod, why don't you take the medium stuff?
Sure. I mean, in developing any experience for young people today, I think from our point of view, we try to put ourselves in their shoes and think what would engage them most. And having something that is more gamified and more interactive and not just a passive video is something we lean to. And when it comes to the developing for the different platforms, the Google Cardboard, even though it's very accessible and cheap, and most people and a lot of classrooms may have adopted it, it has its limitations because there is very little interactivity that you could really engage with. There's a few buttons possibly on the top, but it doesn't really allow you to use your hands or to move around in a space. So we for the past 5 years or so now have transitioned to using headsets that do have tracking abilities. So these are Oculus and HTC and other kind of suppliers and hardware suppliers. The game changer has been in the past 2 years or so when Oculus released a standalone headsets that are slightly more accessible. They don't cost as much as getting a laptop or a computer that's tethered to a headset. It's just a wireless mobile device. So developing for that platform seems to be the logical approach, just because it really gives a different sense of being able to connect to the stories and not just watch them passively, but to walk around in the space, being able to pick things up, being able to look at things up close and touch them and move them, and also challenge the people who are the visitors to find what it is that they're supposed to do, or find how to connect the stories. So this current project is available on the Facebook or Oculus platform for anyone that has an Oculus Quest or an Oculus Quest 2 headset.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And maybe this is kind of a related question, even more basic one. But how do you envision students or the users will use it, and what they'll get out of it? What's kind of like the main takeaway or the value?
Sure. Well, okay, you have to understand that Israeli students don't formally study American history, right? So Israelis are fascinated by the United States. They want to understand our history and our culture and our society. But there are sort of small segments in the high school curriculum where they would have exposure to Americana, just like they would have exposure to other kinds of other countries, across the planet. So, we add that value because that's what our purpose is. But so part of what has to happen, actually, even prior to the students coming to the ACJ, is we provide teachers with like a one-page vocabulary concept sheet, because they're not going to understand what Independence Hall is, right? So they're going to dive into it. But we want to give the teachers some resources where they don't even, the word segregation, right? I mean, yes, they understand the word in Hebrew and in English. They exist in both languages for segregation. But to put some context, we're providing information to the teachers before the students come to the ACJ. Then they come here, and it's actually a 3-station experience. That was the first station. But the second station, and I think that also relates to Stacy's question, we want this, the only place you can have this immersive experience is here at the ACJ. But we're also now developing with Nimrod a station 2, which is going to be on an iPad, and it's going to be, we're not sure yet, but it's going to be potentially a very exciting game to help the students broaden and deepen their understanding based on what interests them. There's a possibility that we could create an app that the student would be able to take on a mobile device and access outside the ACJ. That would be the second station. And then the third station is basically having an engaged conversation in either Hebrew, English, or Arabic with either myself or one of my colleagues here, because we're hoping that this experience raises lots of questions for the participants. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, there needs to be a follow-on, right? Because that's how these ideas are reinforced. That's how the questions keep popping up in the students' minds. So we will then offer them a virtual tour of the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. They can talk about First Amendment rights with our expert partner at the museum, who's actually going to be speaking after this. We've got somebody who does a Canva workshop on civic activism posters. And then the last option in the smorgasbord is 1960s protest movement music. So it's really a full package.
Awesome. Great. Well, we have just a few minutes left, but I'm going to work in some of the audience questions now. So Lena was asking how long the production process of this whole experience was, and if you all could describe it in stages. Things like the design workflow or the technological thought process that went into creating.
That's exactly what Nimrod was going to talk about. Way to go.
Excuse me. Also to mention that there was a question from Ian. The station 2 is probably something that could be, Lisa is obviously concentrated on developing for the ACJ, but the if you like, the solutions or the projects or the products that we develop, if Lisa would want to in the future, can also have this, the station 2 can be delivered to the classroom in a tablet or mobile devices, and doesn't necessitate to have the VR headsets. So people or the students can actually experience the station 2 possibly, if they want to, or partially at the classroom, which will create a kind of an interest to visit the ACJ and try the immersive experience in full. As for, let me present a bit of a presentation we prepared, just to give you a sense of how we developed this. So we realized what the task was. We defined the project and what the intentions are. We created a theme, something that would kind of be a narrative arc for the experience. We looked into the various devices that we could use and compared between the different headsets, the advantages of each, and selected that first. We then looked for something that would be a presenter that would kind of lead us through the experience and would give us a context to what we're seeing. We picked a number of, we can obviously go through hundreds of years of development of history in 10-minute experience. So we picked 3 monumental events. We looked for and realized what's the message in each. So one of them was shaping democracy, the other was fighting for democracy, legislating for democracy, and the promise of democracy. And then we looked at what the ACJ would need in terms of how to install this and what would take care of it. We looked at the space and how to have the onboarding process and how we could fit everyone inside and how we would manage the experience. And this is the result. I mean, if you look at the top, we took images, photos of the Independence Hall. We recreated it in 3D, so the users can actually move around the space. The same for Zion Park. We took the Zion Park image and recreated it in 3D, and had our eagle fly through it. So the scope of work was this entire process, which took eventually a year to complete. So I hope this gives enough information as to what we did.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Any other last minute questions from the audience? You can feel free to just drop in the
one
chat.
from Lucretia that says, can this be used without the headset? I mean, I don't think you really understand, you get a sense of it, but it would be the sort of the same video that you saw at the beginning, right, Nimrod?
If necessary, we can adapt the immersive experience into something that can be played on a PC with keyboards and a mouse. It's recoding, if you like, the content to fit to a different input. It is possible. It's not meant for that. We really wanted the tourists or the visitors, to visit the ACJ and go through an experience at the ACJ. However, for the long term, any experience, once you have the content, can be adapted to a number of platforms.
I do want to address, if I could, Ian's point about the lack of funds, right, to purchase 30 headsets. We only have 10, and that's actually why we have 3 stations, because we're anticipating classes of 30, and we're sort of cycling them through in kind of a round robin. So yes, we are also limited in the funding that we have. And so that was our, I think, pretty creative way of making that work to our advantage and addressing that challenge.